All right. All right, worldview class. We're almost there. It's so this will be for Wednesday, April 22nd. I'm just going to mention a couple things before we get moving. So many of you, in fact, most of you probably have seen the email I sent out yesterday. A bit of a scold regarding the lacking performance for some when it comes to actually watching the Zoom lectures that I've been posting for the class. You should be aware, of course, that that I sent that, and if you haven't read it, please go ahead and do it. But also be aware that I posted another one today as a follow-up because I had some concerned students email me with their own comments and responses, and there seemed to be a bit of a disconnect. So look, guys, gals, this is pretty straightforward. An email, the email from yesterday, which was meant to convey disappointment, that is not to be equated, that is not to be connected to anything like dislike. So there's a very big difference. So you're my students. I like you. I care about you. It's my job to care that you're doing what you need to do to learn and to learn effectively, and that you are measuring up to the expectations as much as you possibly can. And I made an assumption that I guess I shouldn't have made, and that was that you all understood that these Zoom lectures are functioning like our class sessions. And as I would expect if we were all on campus together, right, I would expect that you attend class. And class actually has a purpose. It actually is very important as far as trying to bring syntheses together for you and to make some connections for you as you go through the material and all the rest. So class sessions are not voluntary. Class sessions are required. They're very important. Similar function here, although we are doing the remote learning environment. My attempt here has been to use these video posts, these Zoom lecture posts, as as roadmaps for you, as intellectual roadmaps for you to connect to some of the things that we're doing. So they really are essential. That was the commentary. Please read both emails, the one from yesterday as well as the one that I posted today that was sent out through the Converge announcements feature. And I think you'll see that there's a more encouraging context that I ended with today, I suppose. Yeah, that's where we are. Please understand what the intention was and take the mild slap on the wrist, the mild scold for what it was intended to be, as an opportunity to mature a little bit and to be reminded of what it means to take your responsibilities seriously for these classes. That is it, and that is all really. So that's kind of where we are. I think you guys are all ready for the semester to be done, and I get that. I'm certainly approaching that myself, but we've just got a little bit further to go, and then we're there. So tomorrow I'll be posting a couple of specific instructions about the final exam, and you can look for those. You'll be notified once I post those. I'll send out a message that makes you aware of that. So that will be coming tomorrow. I think we're good as far as I know. If you have some further concerns, then don't hesitate to let me know. But I think we're where we need to be. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit more with a couple of elements regarding postmodernism and radical subjectivity, and I want to make some connections to some elements of pop culture that I think will be important for you. All right, so we ended the other day, I talked about a couple of different films. I think, if memory serves, I ended talking a little bit about The Matrix and the subjective, the relative universe that is contained in The Matrix. I really like how the postmodern philosophy and also the existential philosophy is framed in The Matrix. I think it's a very interesting framework, and I think the set pieces work pretty well. So it's one of those films that actually I've had groups talk about before, and they do a pretty effective job. This year I went a different route with postmodernism as far as the group presentation was concerned. But in the end, I think that The Matrix is one of the great films as far as conveying these postmodern philosophies and bringing them to the forefront very effectively. So today I'm going to mention 3 different films, and I'm going to start, actually, I don't remember the order that I posted the links, but I'm going to start with Fight Club because I posted a link for you. I spotted it the other day, and I was, I watched it and was very, very impressed and happy by the student presentation. So I found this on YouTube and was pleasantly surprised by the ways in which postmodernism is dealt with by the young lady in the video link that I posted. And she does a really just a fantastic job of bringing together postmodernism with the various themes that are prevalent in Fight Club. So I posted that for you. So it's not a clip of the actual film, but it is instead something that I think will be very effective at communicating how postmodernism is brought to the forefront in the movie. So please watch through that. The ways in which the Tyler Durden character is framed in the film, so the Brad Pitt character, very interesting in bringing postmodernism to the forefront. And so the young lady who gives this video presentation, she's talking about, the incapacity, right? The inability for these characters in the film to find meaning, and yet their search for meaning takes them in some pretty radical and subjective new directions. And what I like about David Fincher's film is that he doesn't pull any punches, but he's very full with his critique. He's critiquing modern consumer culture at the beginning of the film, but he also critiques the polar opposite in the film as the characters give themselves over to radical subjectivity. And so, although there is a postmodern narrative construct that exists in the film, to be honest with you, what Fincher has put together is also, very interestingly, a critique of postmodern radical subjectivity in the film and the costs of it through the Tyler Durden character. So yeah, watch this young lady's presentation. I think it's really wonderful. It's only about 7 minutes long or something like that, so it's not going to take a whole long time, but I think it will be really helpful for you. The other 2 films, so I just want to dig into the other 2 for a few minutes anyway. So the first one I want to talk about is Memento. So Memento is one of the early films by Christopher Nolan. It's the second feature film that he made after an indie piece called Following. And so Memento comes out in 2000. And just the construct of the, even the narrative construct is postmodern. So it is not a story that is told from start to finish. It is not linear. There are some cyclical components of the story, and it also is working from the end backward in time. And yet it's not, again, it's not completely linear, although there's, part of it has to be. It is actually cyclical in parts. So even that construct, how the movie is told, how the narrative is formed, that in and of itself is thoroughly postmodern and subjective. The first clip that I posted is it's like a 20-second clip, but it's a perfect way to introduce a basic concept of the film, and that is that the key character named Leonard, played by Guy Pearce, the Australian actor Guy Pearce. So the character Leonard in the film, we along with him, we are constantly discovering and rediscovering some of the things that have happened to him. His character is suffering from memory loss, and so he is Uh, his whole way of relating to people around him and relating to the reality that he's living in is um, by piecing together little notes that he's written and posted for himself and trying to make sense of them in a way that allows him to figure out his reality and have some clarity. And so the first sequence is really just kind of a funny one, honestly. So it's a sequence where Leonard is running through this, through this alley, and in just about that 20-second framework, he initially is thinking that he is chasing some antagonists in the film of some sort. And then he very quickly realizes, oh, he's not the one who's doing the chasing. He's actually the one who's being chased by by these individuals. And it's a very quick and simple example of the radical changing subjective format that we're exposed to in the film through the psyche of Leonard himself, who never seems to know whether he's coming or going, or who he's relating with properly, or even what's going on around him. It's just thoroughly postmodern in that sense. Very simple way to connect to that. The other clip is more important, and it's the end of the end of the film for us. But remember that the film has been told in reverse, so we're actually dealing with a set piece that sets us up for a lot of what we have seen. And in this sequence, Leonard has actually, we find out, Leonard has actually learned some key elements of who he is, who his wife was, who some of the other characters who we've been exposed to in the film were, and what they meant to Leonard. Leonard has actually learned some important things, but he makes the choice to rewrite his memories, to construct them from scratch, and to essentially define his own reality himself, and to construct it in whatever way he chooses to, whatever way he finds meaningful. And one of the really interesting components of Memento in this postmodern sense is that reality isn't just constructed once and then left to its own devices as if that reality will carry forward. In this, through this person of Leonard, we find that he is constantly reconstructing. And so whatever reality he's living in the moment may not be the reality that he chooses to renegotiate and reconstruct at a later time. And so there's this constant reevaluation that Leonard makes of his own reality, and we see that in the sequence that I posted. It's a fascinating film, and it is one of the movies that Christopher Nolan did early on in his career that that really, for a lot of audiences, turned them on to the ways in which worldview and philosophy can be integrated very effectively into movies. And one of the things that I actually respect a lot about Christopher Nolan is the fact that although he has gradually become one of the most famous filmmakers in the world, and now he has a lot of money thrown at him by studio executives to make movies, he's still a very creative artist. He's still very concerned with all sorts of visual narrative authenticity, and he's still a really good experimenter. So he hasn't lost that love for the art itself. And I love that about Christopher Nolan, because he certainly makes films that a lot of audiences really flock to go and see, but he's still thoroughly innovative. And philosophy for Christopher Nolan is critical. We've seen this before. This is not the first Christopher Nolan film we have dealt with. So Interstellar, the secular humanist component is certainly there. With the Dark Knight trilogy, he certainly brings these components to the forefront, both the Kierkegaardian existentialism, but also some more broad components of existentialism, very much heavily featured in those movies. It's a kind of a staple for Christopher Nolan. So Memento is one of the very first films that we see Nolan experimenting with these things. Okay, the other film that I wanted to post on, because the group, right, so the individual students who have been posting on their group presentation, now of course, again, they're doing it individually, but they did Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I've been watching through their submissions and have enjoyed those. So please do your due diligence and watch those various posts for all of the students that have been doing that. There's no doubt that Monty Python and the Holy Grail it is told through an engrossing and hilarious but thoroughly postmodern construct. Okay, the last film that I want to mention though is Drive. Okay, this is a very clever kind of a modern version of a sort of an Art Deco format, but thrown into the 21st century. Very clever, very engaging film starring Ryan Gosling in the title role. And I think it's really interesting that Gosling's character is an extremely a morally ambiguous character, which is a part of this postmodern construct. I think it's really interesting, by the way, that even Ryan Gosling's character is never named. We never hear a name. We never are told his name. He is simply known as Driver, okay, in the film. And the reason, of course, we learn is that he, in his day job, he works as a stunt driver for various filmmakers, and he also works at a local garage fixing cars. But we learn that Driver has another part to his life, one that he does not broadcast to anyone else, and that is that he offers his superior driving services to criminals. And he takes them to and from their criminal jobs, you know, typically robberies. He takes them to their various locations and waits for them, and that helps them get away once they are done stealing money or what have you. And yet we see this is similar in a sense to what I talked about the other day with The Godfather, right? So any person in their right mind is supposed to, obviously, the goal would be, if you're thinking through a Judeo-Christian framework, for us in particular, our presumed association would be, this guy is pretty messed up and he's doing something that he shouldn't do, right? Obviously, he's engaging in criminal enterprises. But similar to The Godfather, you are brought into the world of the driver, and you are experiencing, in a sense, experiencing his life along with him. And so you're an insider here who is drawn in to this, these experiences and into the narrative, and you're meant to be, very much connected to him and in a sense rooting for him, right? Intrigued by his life and his decisions and his interactions with other people. This is particularly true when he meets the young woman, his something of a love interest in the film. Doesn't really go anywhere, but you are meant to witness as he lives, in some respects, what we would all deem to be a pretty normal life. He has an apartment, he goes shopping for his food, he meets this pretty young, presumably single mother. We find out otherwise later on in the film, but he meets this young woman and obviously is interested in both her and her son, and takes an interest in spending time with them and being something of a of a father figure for the young boy for a short amount of time. He has, he interacts with his, his co-worker who works at the garage. They obviously are running this business as very typical fashion as we would expect them to. But then all these other alloyed parts of his life are kind of mixed in there together, and we have this bit of a moral melting pot with the driver in the film. And And then it takes a real surreal turn, as you will see if you watch the film. It takes a really surreal turn when we are introduced to, highly intensive moments of violence and death later in the film. And yet, this speaks to the success of this postmodern construct. We've been lulled to sleep with the fact that, this guy's life seems to be shockingly normal given the fact that he's partaking in some of these other criminal enterprises. So we shouldn't be caught off guard when there are consequences of those criminal actions. But because they have been normalized somehow in the radical subjectivity of the universe that this story exists in, we're almost surprised when these activities actually do begin to catch up with him, and there are direct formal consequences. And we roll with it as the audience, and yet it's a very intriguing format. It is the musical score for the film is also just brilliant. Ryan Gosling is the perfect actor to play this role because he's tasked with being very somber, robotic in a sense when it comes to his emotional output, very reserved, and that plays well with the morally ambiguous universe that he is living in. It's all actually very well cast, very well acted. The script is actually very tight, and it works very well. But Drive is rightly regarded as one of the great postmodern entries of, postmodern philosophy entries in the film genres of the past, couple of decades at the very least. So I would highly recommend it to you. I mean, it's a very, very interesting kind of a very unique sort of a orientation with the film, but it works very well. And I think it's not only effective and interesting as a worldview or philosophy orientation, it's also just really good entertainment on top of everything else. So these are all the films that we've been talking about are fantastic examples of how, in our pop culture, in the world around us that we're living in, these notions, these postmodern ideas are filtering down to us at a number of critical levels. And we are partaking of them as citizens in this postmodern relativistic world in which we live. And we are often partaking of these philosophies without fully realizing it at times, perhaps. But now you guys do realize it, and it's gonna, I think, have an impact on how you watch things like movies and television and video games that you play and music that you listen to moving forward, which is part of the goal. Okay, so that's it for our class sessions anyway on postmodernism and pop culture. But on Friday, so for Friday, April 24th, excuse me, I'm going to be walking you guys through Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And so for about 50 minutes or so on Friday, because it'll take me a full 50-minute presentation, I want to take you through the ins and outs of that story, its implications, some of the philosophical set pieces that I think are really critical for us to understand. So remember, of course, everyone needs to have read Huxley's Brave New World by Friday. And many of you, in fact, most of you, need to have your Brave New World responses submitted to me by Friday. So those are posted on the course page in Converge if you want to access those response questions, but just make sure that you have those done by Friday. I think that's it, guys. Thanks again. I hope you're well, and we'll push things through and get this semester done and be on our way. I hope you're well, and I will connect with you again on Friday. All right. Have a good night.